Krishna. First, I just want to thank Rajahari Prabhu for letting me speak about Prabhupada and interrupting the normal flow of Srimad Bhagavatam class. I am simply a rank and file devotee in ISKCON, but because I came to India in 1975 for the Gurpurnima festival and stayed for the next 2.5 years, I had more association, even though a lot of it was from a distance, but still more association with Srila Prabhupada than most devotees in ISKCON. And so, therefore, 26 years ago, I wrote a book called Srila Prabhupada is Coming. I don't have any copies with me. I'm not trying to sell the book right now, but I am going to intend to make an audio book, and hopefully this year, and also possibly reprint the book here in India as a paperback. So look for that in the future. And it just so happened that my godbrother who edited my book, Tattvavit Prabhu, is here. And I felt that his editing, and he's an excellent writer in it, himself, and his editing was necessary so that there wouldn't be any question of a Mataji writing a book like this is, because it was the first and almost only book by a female disciple of Srila Prabhupada telling their memories. And so I'm just going to briefly start with my one-line version of how I became a devotee, and if there's time I can go back and tell you more details if you want. But my one-line version is, a friend took me to the Hare Krishna temple in Boston and left me there. That's my one-line version. It's actually what happened. Okay, wait for the bell. So a lot of devotees, when they explain how they became devotees, joined the Hare Krishna movement, they were actually looking for Krishna, they were looking for God, they were looking for answers in life. And I can't really say that that's what happened with me, but in any case, like I said, I can go to a little more detail later, but really I wanted to share about my memories of Srila Prabhupada here in Juhu. And I have recently read this in the Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, the whole story of Prabhupada getting this property. Of course, there's the longer version by Giriraj Maharaj, which I have to admit I haven't read yet. But in any case, this is such a fabulous temple. I haven't been here in 15 years, and it looks like everything is just moving so, it's just expanding so much, and the deities are incredibly beautiful. So I can tell they've been nicely worshipped. Anybody can tell that. There's so much potency in this temple. So, so it's a little, I'm sorry I have to tell like where I was and to explain the stories about Prabhupada here in Juhu. But like I said, I came to the 1975 Gurpurnima festival, and after the festival, it ended in Vrindavan, and I stayed at that temple until my visa ran out. Always have problems with visas because I come from America. They're not so easy to get visas, extended visas. So I had to go back to America to get a new visa in that summer, and came back to Vrindavan. Prabhupada was there, and I was supposed to come here, okay, I'll call it Bombay because that's what we called Mumbai back then. So I was supposed to come to Bombay and be Gopal Krishna Das Adhikari's, later Maharaj, supposed to be his secretary. But because Prabhupada was in Vrindavan he said I could stay there while Prabhupada was there. And somehow or other, I got permission from Brahmananda Swami, who was one of Prabhupada's secretaries, to type Prabhupada's letters. So Brahmananda would get the gist of the letter from Prabhupada, and then he made a tape of the exact words, and that's what I listened to and typed up Prabhupada's letters. So that was really ecstatic because I got to go to Prabhupada's quarters, even though I wasn't going into Prabhupada's room, still any association with Prabhupada, even from a little distance, was ecstatic. So in coming and going, I explained to Brahmananda Swami that I was actually supposed to go to Bombay, and I had a ticket from Delhi to Bombay. It was like the last part of my ticket. And he was telling me how Prabhupada, from Vrindavan, he was going to Ahmedabad. There wasn't a temple there, but they were holding a big Pandal program. And Prabhupada had limited luggage allowance on the plane because foreign, international limits for baggage were greater than domestic. And so that conversation about helping out with the luggage ended up with my going to Delhi when Prabhupada came there, and the plane was leaving early in the morning. So I don't remember all of the details, but somehow or other, when we got to the airport, they really weren't accepting my ticket. Well, they weren't accepting it because I was getting off the plane early. My ticket was to Bombay, but I wanted to get off in Ahmedabad. And this to them was a problem. So they said, okay, when everybody else has checked in, if there's any room, then you can go. So it worked out that they finally let me on the, through the gate into the waiting room. And I have to tell you an embarrassing thing that happened because for some reason, I had luggage on my shoulders. I wasn't just checked-in luggage. It was bags I was carrying things for other people. I don't remember exactly what it was. But when I came into the waiting room, which does not look like waiting rooms today, it was like long benches, and there was no women and children. At that time, it was all businessmen with their suitcase, their briefcases, and so on. And when I got into the waiting room, it was completely packed with people, no place to sit. So what do? I paid obeisances on the dirty floor. And then I just sat there right in front of Prabhupada. And Prabhupada just waved his hand just like this, and the people to the side moved over and made room for me to sit. And once I was sitting down, I just really felt like I had made a fool of myself. Like I said, it was just not a carpeted floor. Anyway, moving on. So Srila Prabhupada sat in the first seat in the plane. I don't remember them having, a seat assigned to you before the plane. And everybody who got on the plane took darshan of Srila Prabhupada. So I was sitting maybe 7 rows back, something like that. And since it's a morning flight, at some point, they were coming around with some hot drinks or, some kind of cake, like fruit cake. And I was refusing it because I thought, I don't know what's in this. But the stewardess says, they're eating this up front. So I knew it was offerable. And then after a little while, the stewardess came back with a coffee cup filled with dahi wadas. They sent it from up front. And I knew it was Brahmananda Swami. He was like a big brother, and he was looking out for me. And when Prabhupada got up to wash his hands, Brahmananda Swami stood in the aisle of the airplane and caught my eye, and so I definitely knew it was him who sent it back. And the Delhi temple had filled up a huge tiffin with all kinds of goodies for Srila Prabhupada, so I knew that's where it came from. But really it was Prabhupada's mercy. So when the plane landed in Ahmedabad, we could hear the kirtan even though the door of the airplane wasn't open. The devotees were on the tarmac chanting Hare Krishna. I mean, times have really changed. Not only could they get in the airport, all the devotees, and the devotees are all from here in Bombay. There were Bombay devotees. There was no temple in Ahmedabad. And they just surrounded Prabhupada when he was the first one off the plane, and they just surrounded him and left. As far as I was concerned, I had to stay back and get my luggage, the checked luggage. And so, okay, I'll tell more details about Ahmedabad because it's all connected to Bombay. So what happened is they took Prabhupada to the house he was staying at. It was Mr. Bogilal Patel, who was apparently fabulously wealthy and had a mansion in the middle of Ahmedabad. But since I had to wait and other devotees had to wait for Prabhupada's luggage and, the other devotees with Prabhupada, so somebody, a life member, I think, he offered to take me to where the ladies were going to stay. But it turns out he didn't actually know where that was. So he kind of gave up and said, okay, we're just going to go where Prabhupada is. So he drove me. It was, like I said, this huge, had a huge garden. You had to drive through quite a bit of land before you get to the house. And then there's like a circular drive with a huge fountain, and go into the living room, and they had covered the floors with white sheets. And there's a few ladies from the family, maybe family friends, were there and guided me to the room where Prabhupada was. It was their library. And so all my bags and luggage, I just plopped down by the door and went in. And it was a real library with books all over the walls, and Prabhupada was sitting behind this huge desk, and he was interacting with everyone who was in the room. So it was not just the Bombay devotees, but it was friends and family members. And it was mostly young men. And so Prabhupada was saying to them, so, what are you doing with your life? And they were, well, we're in school, we're in college, we're studying. Prabhupada said, what are you studying? And they said, technology. And Prabhupada said, why are you bothering to study technology when they've already perfected it in the West? And then he started naming different items like Swiss watches, and I think Prabhupada mentioned his Grundig dictaphone, which is made in Germany. And then different devotees were adding to the list of countries where technology has been perfected. So then he turned back to the young men and he said, I want 100 young men from Ahmedabad to join the Hare Krishna movement. Hare Krishna. I know that didn't happen immediately, but I'm sure it's happened manyfold by now. So the Pandal program was set up, I think, for 5 nights, and it was so well attended. Typically, what would happen would be a big kirtan, and then Prabhupada would arrive, and, I forgot to mention, well, on the Pandal stage, the presiding deities were Chota Radha Rasabihari. Yeah. So, Giriraj Das Brahmachari at that time was there, and therefore his secretary, Mother Aditya, who left her body a few years back, she was the pujari for the deities. And So just to say that after the 5-day Pandal program, it was so popular, so well attended, that Prabhupada, he had to leave, but he said, keep the program going. And so they had to find a new location, and they hadn't advertised, but they started advertising, and that was another 5 days. They were also well attended, but Aditya had to come back to Bombay because Giriraj Prabhu was also coming back, and he needed his secretary. So she left the deities in my care. And I was just so thrilled. I mean, I was an experienced pujari because I had joined in 1971, and this is 1975. So it just still amazes me when I see the deities. Like, how do they tolerate me? And I was just taking care of them in this life member's house that ladies were staying at, but somehow they let me serve them. So Prabhupada's program, like I said, was kirtan, and then he would speak. And then usually they would play the Hare Krishna People movie that Yadavara made. It was like the only full length probably was half an hour, but it's still an amazing movie. Have you all seen that? The Hare Krishna People? Not many. Well, it's a classic. And they would just put a sheet up in the front of the stage. And so we could see the movie from behind the sheet. We'd see it backwards. And it always thrilled everyone, especially when the kids were in the movie. So from Ahmedabad, Prabhupada went to Mauritius. So after the 5 extra days of this Pandal program, everybody came to Mumbai. Oh, let me just share with you, when it was extended, it was Achyutananda Swami and Sridhar Das Brahmachari, who became Sridhar Swami, the late Sridhar Swami. The two of them would lead the program. And what I remember about their fundraising was this particular line. They would say, "We are rich men's sons. We do not need your money. But you need to give your money for your benefit." And that way, they would ask for donations. If anybody gave 100 rupees, which was a lot of money back then, I mean, it used to be 7 rupees to $1, and now it's 88 rupees to $1, so value has changed quite a lot. So that was a big donation, 100 rupees. And they had a framed picture of Radha-Rasa-Bihari to give whoever gave 100 rupees. And they would make a big hoopla about it. And then after all the men had given as much as they were going to give, then they'd send myself, Daiva Shakti, Radha Kund. That was all the ladies. We would go to the ladies, and they'd say, "Go get their paisa." And so that's what we would do. And I just thought that their preaching technique was quite amazing and effective. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada went to Mauritius. We all go back to Bombay. And when Prabhupada came back from Mauritius, we all met him at the airport, and then when he went to his room, which you probably know was on one of the apartment buildings, one of the flats that was already on the property when Prabhupada bought the property. And so we were all invited. I mean, all of us was probably like, 20 devotees or something. But we went into his room, and he told us that he had been in a car accident in Mauritius, and we were all shocked. And he said he hurt his knee. And then, in such a personal way, he lifted up his dhoti to show us his bruised knee. I just want to say, I didn't mention at the beginning, but seeing Prabhupada in America was always a pretty formal situation, at least for women, because we would only see him maybe going on his morning walk, coming back from his morning walk, hearing him give Bhagavatam class, being there for initiation ceremonies. but it was very formal situations. Whereas in India, Prabhupada was relaxed, he was at home, he was more available. Wherever he was, he always had an open darshan every night at 5 o'clock, and anybody could go. And that was just such a different experience of Srila Prabhupada. Because ISKCON is a big family, and we've always, all our temples definitely had that family feeling. You know, we all were hankering for Srila Prabhupada to notice us. And yet, you know, there was so many devotees when Prabhupada, in any temple Prabhupada went to in America, devotees would come from all over to see Srila Prabhupada, not just the local devotees. Like when I got initiated in New York, people even came from Canada. They came from the whole East Coast of America, from so many different temples. So it was always a lot of devotees there. But in India, there was a handful in most temples. So, so let's get back on track. Prabhupada came back from Mauritius. Okay, so one of my first temple presidents, I tended to move around a lot, so I had a few first temple presidents. But in Washington, D.C., temple president was Damodar Das, who had this philosophy that we should just be serving the Guru, not just hankering to see him. So when Prabhupada arrived in New York in July of 1971, there were 6 of us in the temple who were going to get initiated. And if we wanted to go to New York when Prabhupada arrived, everybody would go to the airport, you know, and welcome him and race back to the temple and see Srila Prabhupada there. But his philosophy was, we're not supposed to gawk at the spiritual master. I don't know if you know that word gawk, but it's like just staring with your mouth open, kind of. So you don't do that. We serve. So we're just going to stay in Washington, D.C., the temple, and do service. And when it's time, we'll go to New York, and you'll get initiated. Okay, here was the test he gave me, by the way, Damodar. Gave me a test of whether I could get initiated. He said, who is Krishna? I said, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he said, who are you? I am his servant. Okay, you can get initiated. That was it. That was the test. So Damodar's wife had just had a baby, and so she couldn't travel with us to New York. But I had a conversation with her. Okay, let me go back a little bit. I had been living in New York at one point. And there was about 25 brahmacharis. We were all waiting to get initiated by Prabhupada. And so we would ask each other, what do you think Prabhupada is going to name you? And the typical answer, what I call a humble pie answer, is Prabhupada's going to name me Maya because I'm always in Maya. Okay. I never was a humble pie devotee. I was always puffed up. So I never said that. But when Mriganatri, Damodar's wife, she asked me that very question, what do you think Prabhupada's going to name you? And that's what I said. I said, he's probably going to name me Maya because I'm always in Maya. So you could say I asked for my name, but anyway, so we go to New York. We stopped in Baltimore on our way to count out 108 beads from a big box of walnut beads that they had bought because we had to provide our japa beads. No one was going back and forth to India, so we had to bring our own beads. And we sat in the prasadam room and strung our beads. And the method was, you get a long enough string that goes 7 times around, the long way around a back to Godhead. That's how we measured the string, so that you could have, you know, all the knots between the beads. And the devotees from Washington had carved the Krishna bead that looks like little Jagannath shape. So what was going on in New York was every day for a week, Prabhupada was giving initiations. And he would only initiate 10 people per day because part of the ceremony was Prabhupada chanting on our beads. And it would take him approximately 6 minutes to chant one round. and he had the beads hanging from the microphone stand in the order that we were sitting around the fire. So we knew, or at least I knew, exactly when Prabhupada was chanting on my beads, which was ecstatic to see that. And so, yeah, for the first hour of the ceremony, we're all chanting Hare Krishna on our beads. And then I started with the men, coming up for initiation. At first it was devotees from New York who I didn't know. And then it was the 4 men from Washington who, as they got their names, Prabhupada would just give a translation, basically, of the name. So it was Astaroth, Saptaroth, Dasaroth, and then Pancharatna. So his name was connected because of the numbers. But he would just say, like for Astaroth, one who drives a chariot in 9 directions. And Dasaroth, he didn't say he's the father of Lord Ram. He said, one who drives a chariot in 10 directions. Like that. It wasn't even a whole sentence. Prabhupada just gave a definition of the names. And then it was the lady. So there was a little girl who was 12 years old. Her mother had just gotten initiated. She was from the New York temple. And Prabhupada was just delighted with her. The reciprocation was amazing. He was asking her, do you chant 16 rounds? Yes, Srila Prabhupada. And he named her Shashi Mukhi because she had a big, round, moon-like face. And then I think I was next. But Saptaroth's wife got initiated, Hemalata. But whenever my turn was, I'm not exactly sure of the order, what I remember is paying full dandavats in front of Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada's servant had the list of names, but he didn't have the microphone. So when he said the name, Mahamaya, I could hear it. Other devotees couldn't hear it. So I was already in a state of shock. And then Prabhupada said my name on the microphone, and there was a shocked silence in the temple. And then Prabhupada started laughing. And everybody started laughing. And what I remember that he said, I don't have a copy of my book to read it exactly, but it's like, illusory energy, Mahamaya. The illusory energy is not all bad. For one, what he said, just like there are phases of the moon, Mahamaya is a phase of Radharani. For one who does not want to serve Krishna, the illusory energy is there. And then he asked if I knew the regulative principles. By the way, we were so misinformed about what we were expected to know. We knew we had to know the 4 regulative principles, but we also thought we had to know the 10 offenses to the holy name. So on the drive, 5-hour drive to New York, we were just memorizing them, made sure we really knew. I don't know why we thought that, but like I said, misinformation happens sometimes. So, let me see. I'm getting diverted from Juhu. Okay. So in 1975, this temple was just a big hole in the ground, and it was filled with water. And Prabhupada was always on Surabi's case. He was the architect, and on his case that the building, the temple wasn't built. But what was here, and I think in relation to where current temple, I think it was just back on this side. It was just basically a corrugated steel hut with non-permanent walls and roof, and pretty simple. So what I remember when Prabhupada came back from Mauritius, one of the things that happened was there was a local group who would chant 24 hours. And I guess they would do it in different places, and they got permission to do it in our temple. And Prabhupada said, my disciples can't do this. And we can do this. But then it turned out that all of this group were here chanting for all the 24 hours. So we were challenged to do that, but Prabhupada was absolutely right. We couldn't do it. We had to divide up the day and the night into like 2 or 3 hour segments, and a few devotees would take each of the time slots. So he, I don't think he was too happy with us, but he understood that we weren't capable of such an austerity of chanting for 24 hours straight. So, okay, I know where I got distracted. I was telling you how Hare Krishna, Jai SriSriRadhaRasbihariTemple, Jai Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman Ki Jai. So, back to the theory or the philosophy of we're not meant to gawk at a spiritual master. So when Prabhupada had this open darshan, I found service to do because that's what I thought was expected of me. I could have gone to Prabhupada's quarters every night, but I didn't. But one night, my god sister Sarva Mangala, Devi Dasi, who I just saw at Govardhan Eco Village, she said, I'm going to go ask Srila Prabhupada a question. You want to come with me? And so I said yes. So we go to Prabhupada's rooms, and someone was just there with a group of guests. And but as soon as we got there, they got up and left. So it was just Sarvamangala and me. So she said to Prabhupada, she was experienced going to Prabhupada's darshans. She said to Prabhupada, well, should we leave or should we stay? And Prabhupada said, well, do you have any questions? We both had questions. And what do we say? We said, no. So we offer obeisances and looked like we were going to leave. But as soon as we got up from paying obeisances, immediately we both started asking our questions. So Sarva went first, though. So she said, Srila Prabhupada, I heard the other day that you said that sannyasi's business is to preach. Brahmachari's business is to assist the sannyasis. And the grihasta's business is to do deity worship. But what about us brahmacharinis? Because actually, we were doing most of the deity worship. And so she was concerned what Prabhupada was going to say, because it looked like we were going to be pushed out of that service. And so she had to ask Srila Prabhupada to clear it up. And Prabhupada said, yes, they may do deity worship. So we both were entirely relieved to hear that. And then my question, what I wanted to ask and what I did say were two different things. I was, at that point, 29 years old. And I was thinking, I'm not going to ever get married. And Prabhupada, I had heard. When you hear things that Prabhupada said, you don't know if it's really true or not. But I had heard that Prabhupada said marriage after 30 is not pleasing because you're set in your ways. So I was thinking, yeah, I'm not going to get married. And by the way, I did, in the end. But in any case, at that time, I had heard that Prabhupada had given a deity to two of my god sisters, Chintamani and Nandulal. Nandulal was in her 30s. She was really old from our perspective. And Chintamani had been married to Sudama, who took sannyas, Sudama Maharaj. So they each had their own special circumstances that Prabhupada had given him a deity to worship. But I thought, well, I'm almost 30. I'm like Nandulal, and so I wanted to ask, can I have my own deity? But I was so intimidated, and unable to speak in the first person, so I said, can devotees have their own deities? And Prabhupada's answer was no. It will distract from the temple deities. So that really penetrated my heart, because to this day, I have a deity in my home, a tiny Gorni Thai deities who had been my late husband's, but I'm very involved with the deity worship in Alachua, Florida, and I understand that Prabhupada was talking in time and circumstance. I was not married at the time, and so at the same time, Grihastas should make their homes a temple. Prabhupada has said that different times, and so we have to look at the circumstances. So that was the first time I got darshan with Prabhupada. One of the reasons I was able to write a whole book about my memories of Prabhupada is that I saw Prabhupada mostly in Mayapur, and at that time I was somehow or other Pishima's personal secretary, and she wanted to go to Prabhupada's darshan every night. So I went to darshan for pretty much every night for 2 months in January and February of 76, and again in 77. But anyway, back to Mumbai. Okay. So one morning when Srila Prabhupada would come down for Guru Puja, he after the kirtan, he said, "Do you know what this song means?" And I think different devotees were saying bits and pieces of the prayer we sing at Guru Puja. But what I remember of what Prabhupada said was that the most important words in the song is Dibya Gyan, that spiritual master gives transcendental knowledge. And I just always remember that. And so I was supposed to be Gopal Krishna Dasadikari's secretary. Turns out he wanted someone who knows shorthand, which I didn't know. And so I lived here in Mumbai just doing deity worship, and honestly, I can't remember what services I was doing exactly, but Jai Pataka Maharaj came from Mayapur and was saying, well, I need devotees in Mayapur, and he had a whole list of services that needed to be covered. And so the temple authorities were willing to give him one person, and Ambika Dasi from Australia had been here longer than me, so even though I wanted to go to Mayapur, they chose her. Thing is, at the very last minute, she changed her mind. Didn't want to go to Mayapur, so I got to go. Yeah. I was given 250 rupees to take the train. And, I went to Mayapur, and so, okay, I just want to share a little bit about the darshans, and then I came back to Mumbai, so I want to say more about Mumbai. So one of the things that happened as Prabhupada's evening darshans was that the pujaris, Jananivas Prabhu, and there was 3 men we called the Shastris. They were like very scholarly young men, and I think one of them maybe got initiated by Prabhupada, but Jananivas and the Shastri would do puja every night in the Lotus building. The temple was on the ground floor of the Lotus building. Prabhupada's rooms were still on the second floor. And the devotees doing this, well, we would call it ghost puja. They were kind of purifying the atmosphere, and they were also shooing out bugs who didn't like the burning charcoals and the incense smoke and so on. They would start on the top, maybe the roof. They'd start, and they'd go circumambulate. There is a wraparound veranda, and they would, walk around. They would sprinkle water in the windows and the doors, and they did this simple but beautiful puja. And when we were in Prabhupada's quarters, we could hear them. And as they got closer, it would get louder and louder until finally they came into Prabhupada's room. And this charcoal would be billowing smoke everywhere, and incense, and the ringing of bell, and any talk would stop at that moment. And it was so transcendental. Typically, the lights would go out, as happened a lot back then. So that was really special moments when the lights would go out, and the incense burning and all that. It was really, really great to be in there with Prabhupada. He mostly would speak in English, but different things happen on different nights. Like one night, the Bengali Grihasta couples, they normally didn't come to Prabhupada's evening darshans, but they had been growing sugarcane in the fields around Mayapur, and they had just harvested it, so they took some of the gore and mixed it with peanuts and made gur badam, probably roasted peanuts. They brought some to Srila Prabhupada, the first batch, and they offered it to him. And that night, he just spoke in Bengali, but you didn't really have to understand what he was saying. It was just so awesome to see the exchange of love, between Srila Prabhupada and these devotees. I'll tell you my favorite story. So I was the temple secretary. That's, Jayapataka Maharaj wanted a secretary, so I was his secretary, which was the temple secretary. And one of the things I did was compile a list of the Western devotees' passport numbers and all their basic information to do with being foreigners. So one night I had been at Darshan and I had helped Pishima back to our room, but I was standing on the first floor veranda telling Vrindavan Bihari Dasi, who was the cooking for the deities on the first floor kitchen, and I was telling her what Prabhupada had said that night, whatever I remembered. And all of a sudden, Bhavananda Maharaj comes down the stairs and says, Mahamaya, do you have that list of all the foreign devotees and their passport numbers and so on? I was, yeah. Is it up to date? I'm like, no. But I can get it up to date by tomorrow. He goes, okay, I want you to go back to Prabhupada's room and tell him that. So Prabhupada had already told us to leave because we could hear we could all hear the arati bell. The temple's on the first floor, and we could hear the arati bell, and Prabhupada told us to go to arati. This was the regular procedure. He would still carry on with his darshan with guests, if there was any guests. So I had to go back up to Prabhupada's room, and I did not feel comfortable going in because he had just told us to leave. So I just paid my obeisances at the door and just sat on my knees. I didn't sit down cross-legged comfortably, just waited for the conversation to break. And when it did, then Prabhupada, Hare Krishna, Hare Maharaj, Hare Krishna. So when the conversation came to a quiet moment, he turned to me, and I knew that was my cue to say why I came back into Prabhupada's room after he told us to leave. So I said, I have all the numbers of the passports and all the legal information, and I'll have it ready in the morning. So the foreign registration man was the one who was asking for this. And I really don't remember what he looked like, but I have a vision in my mind that he had a little mustache and was staring at me. And he just looked at me like, who do you think you are? And he actually said, who is she? And at that moment, I really didn't know what Srila Prabhupada was going to say. But like I said earlier, all the devotees wanted to be noticed by Prabhupada. We didn't know. I mean, I'm just a rank and file devotee. I didn't know what he was going to say. And Prabhupada said, she is the secretary. And I was so happy that he knew my service. So, okay, let me go back to, oh my gosh, I think I might have erased my list of, okay, no, here. Okay, so from Mayapur, I came back to Mumbai because there was a book distribution party that was, well, I guess Gargamuni Swami at the time, he had buses of men going out and selling, what is it called when they buy whatever books are published and then standing orders. Yeah, they were doing standing orders in various universities and so on around India. And their filing system was pretty much non-existent, and you have to have it together in order to follow up when new books came out. So they basically asked Palika Devidasi to come to Mumbai and sort it all out and make it a workable file. And she asked me to come and help her. So I came back to Bombay in 1977. This was, Prabhupada was in Mayapur. The Gurpurnim festival had taken place, but Prabhupada was so ill at that time that when everybody left for Vrindavan part of the festival, he stayed in Mayapur. Prabhupada stayed in Mayapur. And then somehow he wanted to come to a Pandal program that was scheduled here in Bombay, and devotees really didn't think he was well enough to travel, but he wanted to come here, so he came for that Pandal. And I just remember that most of the nights he wasn't the speaker. He spoke something like one or two nights. What I remember most about that Pandal program was that there was an initiation, and it was something like 10 or 12 devotees got initiated, and it was on Ram Navami Day. So one devotee was named livedarshan, but all the other names were connected to Lord Ram. So that was really special. So at that time, I mean, other people have told the story of how at that time, I'm not even sure if it was 77, I get my years mixed up, but pretty sure it must have been 77, that when Prabhupada came to Bombay, he wanted to stay in his new quarters, which weren't ready. And like I said, I guess I was here at the time, but I wasn't part of, bringing Prabhupada up to his unfinished quarters and dealing with construction all around him. But I did have occasion to go up to Prabhupada's rooms because Palika and I completed the filing service that we were meant to do, came to here to do that. And then I was asked by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he asked me to come up. He was Prabhupada's servant at the time, and he had his own little office by Prabhupada's room. And he asked me to retype what we call the initiation name book. And it was practically unreadable because so many devotees had gotten initiated, and probably like in 73 or 4, it had been typed in a book. But then from that point on, they had just been adding names as they as devotees got initiated, they'd add the names in handwriting, and some pages were just so packed with names, it was hard to read, and he asked me to retype it. At that moment, I was still under Palika's, she was my authority, and she did not want me to do that service because at that point we were still working on the filing system. But I'm not a very submissive devotee, and so I did it anyway, despite her objections, just didn't let her know I was doing it. But it was also an excuse to go, usually walk up to Prabhupada's quarters because the elevator typically wasn't working. And I really appreciated typing up. There was like 3,900 names at that time that I typed out. And just to say that because I did that typing in 1995 at Gurpurnim Festival in Mayapur, we were preparing for Prabhupada's centennial, and they had, I can't remember all the different branches of their mission to celebrate Prabhupada's centennial, but they called them petals, and they were of a lotus flower, and one of the petals was uniting Srila Prabhupada's family. And so in that initiative, they had a copy of this book that I had typed in 77. So here it was almost 18 years later, and I'm seeing this book, and I actually read the whole thing. I mean, it took me several days, really. Would come and read for an hour or two for several days in a row. And then after that, I was asked to work with this initiation name book. The devotees in Mayapur typed it up as a database, and then I was asked to maintain this database, find any missing names. And so I've added about 900 names, which sounds like a lot, right? Yeah, so now the total number is 4,750, more or less. That's how many disciples of Srila Prabhupada who got at least first initiation. No one's kept track of second initiation, but so I have a connection from back then in 77, typing up the names, and I still to this day am maintaining the database. So it's also online on Krishna.com, the database. It just gives some basic information, like that's in the initiation name book. The spiritual name, it may say Das or Dasi. Not always, but we have assigned whether it's Das or Dasi. And then the place of initiation, which may be where they got initiated, or it may be what temple they were from when they got initiated. Could be one or the other. We don't know which necessarily. And then the month and the year. Not always given also. I mean, sometimes it's just a name, but it can't have as much as that information. But in the database that I maintain, I try to get legal names and contact information, and just keeping track of who might know that devotee. And also I have assigned like a status: active, connected, lost, deceased, like that. That's not public. None of those details are public information, but it's just, I see this as a list for posterity, that if somebody says, oh, who's to say you didn't just make up this list? We don't know that these were really Prabhupada disciples, but giving the legal name and this other, contact information, it gives it more legitimacy, and no one, hopefully in the future, will say we made it up. It's really true. Sometimes I know Prabhupada would say I have 10,000 disciples, but he had extraordinary vision. I know there's more to say about Mumbai, but I've got to look at my list. And Okay. I guess that's the most important points. And do you want me to go back and say more about how I came to Krishna consciousness? Devotees sometimes like to hear that. Yeah? Okay. Well, I come from New York. I was born in Manhattan, but my parents lived in a suburb called White Plains, New York. And I would say that they were New York intellectuals who were from ethnically Jewish, but in reality, they were atheists. They really had no understanding that there's God. The closest I can come to is that one of my grandparents was born in Germany, and he left Germany when he was 17 to get away from the Jewish religion that his family practiced. They were Orthodox Jews, and he did not want to practice. So he came to America, and all my other grandparents have been in, their relatives have been in America for a long time, and none of them were at all believing in God. So when you're raised like that, I also didn't believe in God. Okay, until I was a hippie, and then somehow or other I thought, well, maybe, and I can't even say why. I just kind of opened the door a tiny bit. I did see devotees first in California in the summer of 1967. No, 68. 67 was the big year in California that the hippies, this is called the Summer of Love, and tons of young people came from all over the country, and that only lasted that summer. But I came the year later, and it was really over. California was still a place for young people to go, but it wasn't a happening place in America the way it had been. So I was in Berkeley, California. I'm walking down the street, and I see these men wearing orange cloth. And at that time, I thought they were Buddhists, because people were setting themselves on fire as protest against the Vietnam War. And then I saw a woman with a baby stroller and a child joining the men. And that was really shocking to me, but I still didn't know what they were. But whatever they were singing, I was immediately drawn to it. And to this day, I have no explanation why, but I basically just started chanting Hare Krishna because it made me feel good. Didn't know their names of God. If someone had told me to begin with that's what it was, I probably would have stopped. But so I saw devotees also in Hawaii. It's a whole story why I went to Hawaii, but I'm not going to tell now. But there was one concert. A lot of these, or all the Hawaiian islands are actually volcanoes. So the volcano on the island Maui, some of them are dead volcanoes, so you could go inside it. And they were having a concert inside the volcano. So as I was walking on the outside of the volcano to get inside, it was steep, but you could walk. Everyone was chanting Hare Krishna. It was just the thing to do. And so I was chanting too, and got inside, and there were some people distributing cookies. So I think that was my first taste of prasadam. It was actually a devotee whose name at that time was Sai, and he had a group of followers. He was their guru, but he was reading Prabhupada's books, and he was teaching his disciples, but he wasn't telling them at first that this was all from Srila Prabhupada. Eventually, well, a few months later, he did surrender to Prabhupada, and all his followers, about 50 of them, They all surrendered to Prabhupada, and they were sent to different temples around America. And they had a car. They had a car with the Hare Krishna mantra painted on the side. And my hippie friends tell me, they'll give anybody a ride, but they never stop chanting Hare Krishna. So I was kind of intimidated by that. Anyway, because the way to get around the island was by hitchhiking, so either that or walking. But anyway, basically, I wouldn't let the devotees know I was chanting with them. But, at this concert, it was Jimi Hendrix concert, just a little time before he died, actually. And everyone was chanting there, but also when I was leaving Hawaii, I now know there were ISKCON devotees chanting Hare Krishna on the street, and they would form two lines, and in order to go past them, you had to go between them. And I was like, I am not doing that. I would just hang out in the back and just pretend that I wasn't chanting when I was. And so, anyway, I came back to the mainland, and like I said, I was chanting Hare Krishna, and ultimately, this friend took me to the temple, tricked me, told me I was going to a party. I thought I was going to a party, but I went to the Boston temple, and they left me there. And this was in January, like right after the New Year, January of '71. I used to hear stories about Giriraj Das Brahmachari, who had just left the Boston temple. So I'm past overtime, and I want to thank you all for tolerating my talk. I hope I glorified Prabhupada in some way. Hare Krishna. I'm going to wait for the bell. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
And just could you please repeat the number of initiated disciples? Was it 4,750?
That's correct. 4,750.
Okay. I thought it would be interesting for the devotees to hear about what famous book your father published.
Okay. Yeah, I do come from a publishing family. My father published one book, which you might have heard of, called the Guinness Book of World Records. Actually, my older brother sold the company some years back, and so the book is still being published. But my father's company was how-to books. He specialized in how-to. So like his bestsellers were bodybuilding and gardening, and he started off with coin collecting and stamp collecting, and then expanded it. And so even as a child, I used to go to his office in New York City and proofread or stuff envelopes and so many things, at least starting from 8 years old. So that's why I said that my parents are intellectuals. And my father would get gifts of bestseller books from his friends in the publishing industry. And I loved to read, so every day I would come home from school and read. I was reading all the bestsellers at the time. Interesting education. Anything else? No other questions? Thank you so much. Wait, Maharaj.
What are your travel plans now?
Sorry?
Your travel plans?
My travel plans for today, you mean?
No, for the next few days.
Oh, Well, I am here only briefly. My plane leaves at 2 o'clock tomorrow morning,
Oh,
back to America.
his too.
Yeah? 2:20?
2:30, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've just been in Govardhan Eco Village for 6 weeks. Yeah, long time. And I hope to come back later this year. And I'll stop at Juhu probably. It's such a nice temple.
Wonderful.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Microphone.
I'll ask you one question about your husband and son. Maybe you can tell about your family and their devotional activities.
And tell about,
Your son and family and their devotional activities.
okay. Well, I was married for 37 years to Gyanagamya Das, who left this world 11 years ago in Mayapur. And my husband was into cinematography. He had majored at Florida State University in cinematography and fine art and or art history or one of those. He had asked Prabhupada in August of '76 in Tehran. It's all in the conversation books. He wanted to make a movie about Krishna consciousness. I mean, Yadav Prabhu has already been doing that for, since the early '70s. But my husband wanted to do that, and Prabhupada kept on saying no. He said, book distribution. Book distribution is what we do. That's how we spread Krishna consciousness. So it's interesting that our son, whose name is Rasacharya Das, he is working in Hollywood as a cinematographer. In the industry, they call it the DP, which stands for Director of Photography. But it's actually cinematography. And he got initiated by Radhanath Swami back in 2012, and I would like to ask all of you to pray for him because he's not so strong a devotee right now. But he has a Lord Jagannath in his home in California that went on Rath Yatra in Iraq. It's a devotee named Partha Sararthi Das, who was a sergeant or something in the army, and he had a bunch of men under him who had to do whatever he said. So he actually had a Rath Yatra while he was in Iraq and somehow gave those deities to my son. They're only about 6 inches high. So I'm hoping that because they're in his home, that he won't forget Krishna consciousness. But his wife is also born a devotee, and her parents are strong devotees. And I was so proud of my son getting initiated and everything and being so strong for so many years, but I guess he has to choose Krishna consciousness for himself. That seems to happen when you get to a certain age and you reassess your life. We call it the midlife crisis. Maybe at that time he'll, turn back to Krishna, understand that everything was true. He just thinks he was born in the movement but didn't choose it for himself. So hope that all the children of devotees choose Krishna for themselves at some point, right? Krishna. Okay. Hare Krishna. I could also add that I have 3 beautiful grandchildren. Hare Krishna. Okay, Hare Krishna. Glory to Srila Prabhupada. Krishna.